South Africans are facing increases for most goods and services after the new 15% VAT rate kicked in on Sunday. It said that the new VAT increase will force consumers to dig deeper in their pockets. For more on this, I'm joined now in studio by Louw. He's from the Free Market Foundation, and Azar, Jammine, Econometrix Chief Economist. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time. And before we get into the VAT increase and what it means for South Africans and what we need to anticipate going forward, Leon, I'd like to give you, and even you, to an opportunity to pay tribute. Of course, we continue to cover the passing of Winnie Madikizela Mandela. It is our main story for the day, and I wonder, Leon, what are your reflections?
Well, I have a lot of history with her and with Madiba. But while he was in prison, she was a personal house friend. We visited in each other's homes. We established a school together to which our grandchildren went, and our daughter and her granddaughter, Zolika, were closest friends and stayed in each other's homes, our daughter with them in Soweto and she with us. And she wrote a very glowing and beautiful foreword for one of my books that my wife and I wrote called South Africa, the Solution. So we had a lot to do with her. And it's quite interesting that people in the struggle try to persuade her not to do it, and she insisted on doing it, and she said, it's time people know what I think. So we have a lot of history with her, and of course it's therefore a loss of what for us was a friend, although we haven't had contact for a long time.
Azar, are there any reflections you'd like to share on the passing of Winnie?
No, all I'd say is that I feel that the country has lost an icon that they regarded very highly of. She was a controversial figure, but I think that many people will be saddened by this.
And of course, while we try and grapple with that, there's the other issue that many South Africans are facing tonight, and that's why you're both here in studio. This is to discuss the VAT increase and what exactly it means for South Africans. Of course, it's been, what, 2 days, 48 hours, about, or just over, since it kicked in. What should we be bracing ourselves for? Let me begin with you, Azar.
Essentially, the VAT increase is going to mean that people will have around 0.5% less in their pockets after the increase than they had before. But I need to emphasize, there is so much emphasis on this VAT hike, and nothing is being focused on the fact that the average taxpayer is also going to pay an additional 0.5% on average tax on his personal income, by virtue of the fact that the government did not adjust the tax brackets in line with inflation. And the average man in the street will therefore, taking the VAT increase into account, together with the increase in personal income tax, have about 1% less in his pocket, 10 Rand out of every 1,000 less in his pocket than he did before. He is fortunate, however, in that this has come at a time when inflation has been dipping by more than expected because of the strength of the Rand and the reduction in interest rates. But all this would have been totally unnecessary if the government had bitten the bullet and tried to constrain its current expenditure. There's no sign of that happening. Some will say that's understandable ahead of a general election in a year's time, but that's the price you pay for it.
What are your thoughts?
Yes, let me first put it in context so people can understand the quantity. The loss made by South African Airways over the last 4 or 5 years is equal to the total amount the government will collect from this VAT increase. In other words, you can assume that this is what poor people pay to keep rich people flying in a loss-making airline, literally subsidizing every seat, every bum on a seat in a South African Airways plane by about 800 Rand. And to make it even more scary, the cost overrun, just the miscalculation of what it would cost to build one of Eskom's power stations, Medupi or Kusile, is 20 times the amount they'll collect from this VAT increase. So the VAT increase means every South African has 1% or maybe 0.5% less And the government has more. That's really what it means. The government is just taking more of people's money. And there are other ways in which it's taking money, by the increase of so-called sin tax, alcohol, tobacco and sugar tax. And the government's own calculations tell us that they do not expect people to consume less sugar or less liquor or less tobacco. They assume they'll consume the same amount, which means they will spend less on healthy things, less on clothes and less on groceries and less on furniture and less on shoes and soccer tickets and what have you. And so this is really just, so it's not a sin tax, it's actually a health tax, because that's where the money comes from. And the VAT increase is just more. And the real big question is, why does the government need more and more and more money, and why isn't it running the economy more successfully? That's the big question. This is simply just taking more from people, ordinary people.
Do you think that the situation could have been avoided if revenue collection had met its targets?
But therein lies the rub. The revenue collection didn't meet its targets precisely because we have now reached a threshold where people are doing whatever they can to avoid paying tax legally. They are working less in order to earn less money because there's no point in working more. They are investing in property or something to be able to write off the interest that they pay on the bond with which at least they can have an asset instead of paying everything to the government. There are many other ways in which it's working. They manipulate taxes that they earn themselves as opposed to the company, because company tax is lower, and in this way they also bypass it. And at the end of the day, the government is not getting as much tax revenue as it might otherwise have had.
Do you think that the changes that we've had, at least at the tax revenue service, and I mean ultimately it is an issue of morale and confidence in the system, right, that gets people to actually be compliant with revenue collection. Do you think some of those changes there will have an impact at all going forward?
Yes, well, of course, if they collect tax more efficiently, they take more money from South Africans and spend less on things like failed state-owned enterprises, on massive, gigantic bureaucracies like the new Twin Peaks Financial Services Board, or the conversion of it, and there are many others I could mention. So really the issue is this, that if we want to be a prosperous society, we should have more money with people and less money with government. That's really what it boils down to, and all the evidence around the world shows us that. So they can be more efficient. But you don't want a government to be more efficient at doing bad things like regulating financial services.
But when you talk about efficiency, are you talking more that there should be a greater move towards privatization of some of these state-owned enterprises? What do you mean when you say they should be more efficient?
Oh, well, I don't think they shouldn't just own them in the first place. You should wind them up. South African Airways is so completely bankrupt that they can have all the turnaround strategies they want. They can spend as much as they want. They would need to invest something like 50 billion rand to recapitalize South African Airways into a viable airline. From that, they will collect something like 20 billion. In other words, all of the VAT will be going to saving something they shouldn't run. They shouldn't even, you can't privatize South African Airways. No one will buy it. It's an empty shell. You should actually just shut it down.
Azar, when you think about the impact that this is going to have in people's pockets, what should our frame of mind be going into the next couple of months? I mean, you know, it's just been introduced over the weekend, so it's going to take some time to really kick in. Number one, when can we expect it to really kick in, and how should we be preparing ourselves?
Well, it's kicking in straight away, so people will, without a doubt, feel it immediately. As I say, there are some other compensating factors right now that will mitigate against the effect being too severe. But what it does end up meaning is that the economy is in a phase of improvement. That improvement will not be as significant as as it might otherwise have been. And for those who believe that we are on a path to a much higher sustainable growth rate where we're going to create a lot more jobs, if this is the way we're going to go about it, there's no chance of ever achieving that higher growth rate.
Very briefly, what does it mean for job creation? Because, of course, a significant portion of that revenue comes out of the personal income tax, which needs people in jobs, right? So what does that mean?
What it means is that everybody will get roughly 1% less of what they previously had. You must understand, there's no more money to spend. In other words, it just means everyone, instead of getting 100 tins of food, they will get 99, roughly. And as far as job creation is concerned, it means the people who would have been making the things that are now not sold won't have a job. On the other hand, the government might argue that if it has the money, it will employ people. But the question is, what does it employ them doing? I drove into Johannesburg today from Volksrust, and what did I see? A whole lot of people along the side of the road cutting the verges of grass, which is entirely pointless, serves no purpose, and that is not producing wealth. What those people should be doing is working in factories producing clothing and furniture and TV sets and cell phones and whatever else, that people need. Those jobs will now be replaced by somebody who is working but producing no wealth. That's the problem.
Do you agree with that, Azar?
Not entirely. I think there is a point in making a neater, nicer looking environment and giving some people who might have no income whatsoever a feeling of self-respect that they have by earning a stipend through cutting grass. But at the end of the day, it's a case of there are too many people working in the public service who are not really producing what amounts to what is known as value added, commensurate with what they are earning. And taxpayers, the ordinary consumer, has to make up for that at his own sacrifice.
All right, well, you two certainly sounded like the bearer of bad news. It sounds like we're in for what would be still quite a tough couple of months ahead, and of course the year ahead as some of these increases set in. And of course you're also looking at the fuel increase that is expected to accompany all of those costs that they've been talking about. That was of course Econometrix Chief Economist Azar Jammine and the Free Market Foundation Director Louw.